You're listening to the Renegade Blitz. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, at RBlitzPod, and at Blitz Videos. And subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app.
It's the favorite time of everyone here in Pittsburgh and also in Baltimore as well. Ravens week. Steelers versus Ravens, always guaranteed to be a fun showcase no matter who's playing and what the record's on. Welcome back to the Renegade Blitz. I'm Ty Polk with Chris Ward and Brandon Walker. And of course, it's Ravens week, so we welcome back Kevin Oestricher from the Locked On Ravens podcast. I know I got his name right this time. I'm not even worried about it. Kevin, how are you doing?
You got 100% on that quiz. I appreciate you. Yeah, I'm glad to be back, guys. And you're right. This is, I think, what everybody's looking forward to. The second back-to-back matchup here between the Ravens and the Steelers. Just a couple weeks ago, we had the first one. But now, the crazy part is this game means a lot for both teams. The Ravens looking to keep up with Cincinnati for the AFC North crown. But Pittsburgh, there's still a chance. There's still a chance Pittsburgh can get in. So I think a win, it goes a long way for both.
Yes, but of course, those playoff hopes could be dashed even before that game as it got moved from its regular 1 p.m. starting time to, I think it always should be a primetime game. It's Steelers versus Ravens. I mean, if you remember the history, it's always a hard-hitting affair, even if the NFL has softened up on hard hits. But that's besides the point. The one thing to talk about this game is the Ravens will be without Lamar Jackson once again, and Tyler Huntley will get the start for this game. Of course, last time out there, Huntley got hurt, and then it was a backup quarterback, Anthony Brown. I can't remember. I want to make sure I get the name right with them, but I'm curious. What was the game plan for Huntley? Because I remember saying on the podcast before, and it's the Steelers should be ready for Tyler Huntley. And then compared to last year's game, he totally showed us something different. So was it just more the team being ready for this situation or Huntley's growth as a quarterback?
Well, I think he's definitely grown. And the thing with Huntley is that I think he understands his role where he's not going to try to do too much all the time. He does have the athletic ability like Lamar Jackson, but no one is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's in a complete league of his own with his abilities. But for Huntley, he's someone who does struggle to, I'd say, push the ball down the field. His deep ball accuracy has not necessarily been there over the course of his career. So they try to look for the more short and intermediate stuff. They do take deep shots here and there. I think you have to when you want to stretch out a defense. But the main game plan for the Ravens was Huntley only threw the ball 12 times. Anthony Brown, when he came in, only threw it 5. So the Ravens wanted to run the football, and they ran it 42 times compared to 17 passes. So when Huntley went out, Anthony Brown comes in, and I mean, you're going into Pittsburgh. The terrible towel was you got Renegade play, and that is a heck of a spot to be in for your first ever NFL action. So he went out there and he did his thing, but Huntley his start now will be his third start against the Steelers in his career. That's how many starts Lamar Jackson has had against Pittsburgh in his entire career. So it's been kind of a back and forth with which quarterback's going to be out there. But I think throughout the course of this rivalry, it's been like the backup quarterback storyline more often than not, where you see backup quarterbacks coming in and making plays for both the Ravens and for the Steelers. So for Huntley in particular, he is someone who can win the Ravens a football game, but they're not going to put up 40 points or 35 points. It'll come down to the Ravens defense. And if the Ravens can convert the Ravens offense under Tyler Huntley, and it's been the whole year, but they've struggled in the red zone. Baltimore over the last 3 weeks has the worst red zone offense in the NFL by like 8 percentage points. Conversion percentage is like 22% touchdown wise. And then over the course of the year, they're 30th in the NFL. So Huntley can do his thing. He can make plays happen. I'm not saying they have no chance because it's Tyler Huntley. They certainly do. But I do think Baltimore is missing Lamar Jackson right now. And I know the question here in Baltimore is just when he's going to be able to get back on the field.
Yeah, the $500 million question for the Ravens, and I think everyone around the league, is the contract situation with Lamar Jackson. Now, if it were me being the Baltimore Ravens GM, I still pay him whatever he wants despite the injury troubles he had, because look how much he changes the outlook of that franchise. I think back to last year and all the close games that Baltimore were able to eke out because of Lamar Jackson. And, of course, whenever the Ravens got out, it's the opposite. Teams were able to come out to him. But I think there's always a question of finishing on both sides for the Ravens. But would you say that a contract for Lamar Jackson is basically guaranteed?
I wouldn't say it's guaranteed, but my personal inclination is that something probably still gets done. And I honestly hope it does because you're right. Lamar Jackson, he's the heart and soul of this team. When the Ravens drafted him back in 2018, they knew they'd have to shift their entire offensive philosophy over to what fits Lamar Jackson, as any team should do with any quarterback, right? When you draft somebody, you want to go all in on that player and not just kind of put them in a system that might not be for them. So I know there was that question with Josh Allen. Where was his fit? Buffalo committed to Josh Allen. The Ravens committed to Lamar Jackson. And honestly, the 2018 season, he was the reason that they turned that year around and made the playoffs. Won, I think it was like 5 of their last 6 games. And honestly, there were the reports coming out before the year ended that John Harbaugh was on thin ice. He could get traded. And John Harbaugh, I think his job was saved by Lamar Jackson in that situation. So when it comes to franchise quarterbacks, I'm always of the belief that, I know from a roster building perspective, paying any guy 250, 300, 350 million, that's going to hurt your ability to go out there, maybe sign a corner if you want one, or sign a inside linebacker if you want. Baltimore has other decisions to make, such as Roquan Smith, and a couple of years down the line, Patrick Queen. Do they re-sign Marcus Peters this offseason? But you know what you have in Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is an elite athlete. It's a great runner. He is also a great thrower. He does both at a very high level. And I think his throwing ability is still underrated to this day. I think he's gotten better in a lot of areas. I know coming into the NFL, he was raw in a lot of areas, but he has worked and he has improved every single season. So if you were to move away from Lamar Jackson, if you were the Ravens, you kind of have to reset that whole process. And look, this quarterback class this year is loaded. There are plenty of talented quarterbacks, but if Will Levis isn't the guy, if you put him in, if Anthony Richardson isn't the guy, if you put him in, any of those guys, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, that clock resets again. So it's like the mystery box theory. I think it might have honestly been from Family Guy. I'm not exactly sure where I heard it, but you have Lamar Jackson, or you can go for a mystery box that could be Lamar Jackson. You
already
know what you have in Lamar Jackson, but if that mystery box is somebody who is one of the just mid-tier quarterbacks who's not really moving the needle for you, you have to move on from that guy, reset again. That can set a franchise back 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So while I think the contract, sure, you can maneuver it, and there's a lot that goes into it. What does Lamar want guarantee-wise? I know the Deshaun Watson deal definitely threw some things out of whack for a lot of these. I mean, Cincinnati's going to have to deal with Joe Burrow, the Chargers with Justin Herbert, but I do think that the bottom line for me is what you have in Lamar Jackson. Both sides have expressed interest, or at least they did in the offseason, that they want to get something done. But, Lamar Jackson's going to earn every penny of an extension that he gets. It's just a matter of what that number is going to be and who's it going to be from.
I like the Family Guy reference. It was, I could have a boat, or I could go to the mystery box. It could be anything. It could even be a boat. I've seen that with a Khalil Mack joke whenever he got traded from Chicago. But I'll be quiet and let the rest of my hosts with me ask a question, as they've been chomping at the bit.
Yeah, Kevin, you mentioned about the Week 14 matchup and the Ravens. They really gashed the Steelers for 215 yards rushing. They really, they imposed their will on the defense. They had that amazing drive to seal the win. And, they got J.K. Dobbins back, and he's been really good for them. And I was really impressed with the offensive line in that Week 14 game, how they closed that out. Tyler Linderbaum the center, is a player that I really like coming out of the draft. This past year. So what have you seen from Linderbaum, and how do you see the Ravens matching up against the Steelers this time around? I know the Steelers all week have talked about shutting down the run, the run game, and they've done better the last 2 weeks. So it should be interesting to see if they, they improve from how they did in Week 14.
Right. I think one of the craziest parts of that game in Week 14 was the fact that coming into the week, the Steelers' run defense was not bad at all. They were a top run, and they still are a top run unit in terms of stopping it this year. I think right now they're fifth in the NFL in terms of run defense. But Linderbaum in particular, alongside most of the rest of the offensive line, they've impressed this year. It was a huge emphasis for Baltimore going into the offseason. I know you guys are very familiar with Alejandro Villanueva and what happened in Baltimore here last year with him. It was not a match made in heaven for those two parties. So they get Ronnie Stanley back. Ben Powers, who's their left guard, he won the competition out of training camp. He's been really good for them. Linderbaum in particular, he has struggled sometimes in bigger time matchups against, Quinn and Williams in Week 1, for example. He gave him a lot of trouble, but I think he's improved as the year goes on. Kevin Zeitler, I think, was a Pro Bowl snub. He's been a Pro Bowl snub 2 years in a row. He's like that beacon of consistency, I call him. And then Morgan Moses, he's had an up and down season, but he's been trending up recently. So against the Steelers front, obviously you have Cam Hayward in there. You have other guys who can set TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith can do their thing as well. You got to worry about them not just as run stoppers, but as pass rushers. Alex Highsmith having a breakout year. He was one of my favorite guys coming out of that draft class, actually. So Ravens playing him twice a year was not what I wanted on my bingo card, but here we are now. I think, though, for what Baltimore has in their offensive line room, they're a ground and pound team, and that's their identity. So regardless of if you come into this game, if you're their opponent with a top 5 rush defense or you're the worst in the league, they want to continue to just wear you down over the course of the game. And the Ravens, on their 42 carries, they averaged 5.1 yards per carry. And you had J.K. Dobbins again. You mentioned him. He came back, averaged 8 yards a carry, had that long 44-yarder. Whereas he gets healthier, and he talked about it, as he gets healthier, those 44-yard runs will turn into long touchdown runs. He's still coming back off of the cleanup surgery he had. So with Dobbins and Edwards in there, credit to them, but I think, again, for me, it all starts up front. I agree. The offensive line is a huge part of things, no matter how good your quarterback is, how good your running backs are, wide receivers, tight ends. If you can't block for them, guys are getting stopped in the backfield or getting sacked, and you're not making anything happen. So I give a lot of credit to Baltimore's offensive line. I know Linderbaum was a bit of a criticized pick by some people because he's not necessarily the biggest prospect in the world. His arm length, I know, was criticized, but he makes up for that with his athleticism, his high football IQ, his strength also. He is a strong guy. So I'm looking forward to this. I do know it's been an emphasis for Pittsburgh over this past week here to focus in and kind of reflect on what happened in that Week 14 game. But I think Baltimore's going to go right back to that ground game, and I think that's the key. If Pittsburgh can stop Baltimore's ground game, I think they can win. But if Baltimore continues to run on them like they did in Week 14, I think it'll be Baltimore's game.
All right. Let's go over to the other side of the ball, because we will talk about Baltimore's receivers, but come on. You got a 35-year-old Deshaun Jackson, and I can't name – I didn't even know – honestly, I didn't even know he was on – before that game, I honestly did not know that he was even in the league still.
Hey, Sammy Watkins is back now.
Sammy Watkins is back. But more importantly, what about the matchup between Pickens and Marlon Humphrey? Those are like two dogs fighting in the yard.
Oh yeah.
It was a good matchup in week 14, and we'll see what happens this time, because Pickens had about 5 for almost 100. No, he had 3. He had some plays on him. I'm sorry.
3 for 78.
3 for 78. So how do you feel about that matchup right now? And then with Marcus Peters out, you got Deontay Johnson. Do you think that Baltimore could hold up against the Steelers, improving wide receiver corps?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, because I know I'd say Pickens got the better of Humphrey in that matchup if you asked him. I mean, it seems like every week Pickens just making some incredible, crazy catch down the sideline, some big play. He's someone who I loved coming out of that draft. And the Ravens, they go David Ajabo, who's still getting his feet under him after his Achilles injury. But I think for Humphrey and Pickens, two very physical players. You know, Humphrey will try to jam me at the line. Pickens obviously will try to get off. I think there's a lot to be said about if Pickens beats Humphrey, like if that's a matchup that's won by Pickens, I think the Steelers will probably win the Deontay Johnson matchup, because you have, outside of Peters, I think the disaster class performance that you were not hoping for Baltimore would be if the Ravens were to lose either Humphrey or Marcus Peters. Now, Peters hasn't been there the past couple of weeks, so it's been Brandon Stevens. It's been Pepe Williams. They've had to call up some other Ardarius Washington. They don't have a lot of cornerback depth right now. So Pittsburgh, I think that's one area where if you even if Humphrey and Pickens is a wash, I think the game plan for Pittsburgh should be to look Deontay Johnson's way early, get him into a rhythm. I think Brandon Stevens is a fine player, but I just think you lose something out there. Even though Peters has been up and down this season, I think that's where you could attack the Ravens defensively, because the Baltimore run defense has been – they're the third best rush defense in the NFL. So Pittsburgh could try to get that going, but if that's not working for him, I think Pickens can make a play or two. He definitely did in Week 14. He's just that good of a player. It doesn't really matter who's matched up on him. But at the same time, I think what you have now is the ability, if you're Pittsburgh, to kind of spread out your offense a little bit more. And what Baltimore's going to have to do is maybe bring some safety help down, maybe put him in the box a little bit. Kyle Hamilton is someone who they use in kind of a big nickel role, so maybe he'll be matched up on Deontay Johnson a little bit too. But I think the key that I'm excited to see the Humphrey and Pickens matchup, because I think both players, I think Pickens is going to be good for a long time. Humphrey already is at the all-pro level. So I think that matchup's only could be seeing for years to come here.
Yeah, and they both went to the same high school too in Alabama, which is Hoover High School, which is is popular on like TV and stuff. But yeah, I think they're like the only two notable players to come out of there. Interestingly, but that went to the NFL at least. But as you mentioned, the Ravens' rush defense ranks third in the league, and they did a really good job in Week 14 shutting down the Steelers' running game. And it seems like the Ravens, they're always a stout run defensive team and everything. What makes them so good against the run, and how big has Roquan Smith been coming into Baltimore?
Oh yeah, Roquan Smith has been incredible. I think for what he has done ever since coming in, he's a two-time All-Pro for a reason. Him and Patrick Queen, and it's not even Queen. Roquan Smith has elevated everybody on that defense. He's a sideline-to-sideline linebacker, really good in coverage, but also he's a great run defender as well. And I think what you have in players like Smith and Queen is that ability to just shoot gaps really, really quickly. And for the way that Baltimore's defensive line is set up, Calais Campbell questionable for this game. He's been a huge part of things. But if Campbell's not able to go, you still have guys like Justin Madubuike and Broderick Washington, 2 third-year players who have really stepped up. Travis Jones, who fell to the third round in the 2022 draft, he had a great game in Week 16 against Atlanta. And then you have veterans like Brent Urban. They lost Michael Pierce early in the season. He was a big loss for them. But it's the ability for guys to work off of blocks and the domination up front that they've had. And also, they have a physical secondary. I talked about it with Marlon Humphrey, Kyle Hamilton, also a physical guy, Chuck Clark as well, Marcus Williams even. Those guys get up and run support, and they help out. So if a running back gets past the first level and even gets past the second level, we don't really see long runs getting broken off on this defense because they have the support on all 3 levels to make it happen. But the defensive line is opening up holes for Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen to shoot those gaps through. And when you have players like that, even if Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith misses the guy in the backfield, the other one, it's been crazy. Like the other one has been there to clean it up on many different instances. It's almost like that Kenny Pickett sack where one of them missed it and then Roquan Smith cleaned it up. So it's those types of things. It's a team effort where I think that's what it has to be for a lot of things. But Baltimore's run defense, it's been hard for teams to run the ball on them this year, and it's forced opposing offenses to get one-dimensional and go either purely pass or continue to try to run the ball, but get themselves into second and long, third and long situations, and that is a disadvantage for them.
Okay. I don't know if you've seen the press conference after the first Ravens-Steelers matchup. I'm the talking head that was talking about Calais Campbell and that blocked field goal. He and Harbaugh talked about he's a Hall of Fame field goal blocker, but he's a Hall of Fame player. Do you think he's a Hall of Famer? And I think Justin Tucker should be walking into the Hall of Fame. How do you feel about both of those? I know you think Justin Tucker, but do you think Calais Campbell is worth his way to the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I'd give a nod to Calais Campbell. He's 1 sack away from 100 sacks here, so maybe that comes against Pittsburgh here in Week 17 if he's able to play. But he's had such a long career of just consistency where he's played in this league this will be his 15th year. This is the end of it, but he's had only just a couple of years, and a lot of that has to do with some injuries where he hasn't gotten a ton of sacks. I mean, in Jacksonville, he had 14.5, 10.5 sacks. This year he's at 5.5. It was a little sack-wise, it took a little while for him to get up to speed in Baltimore. I think Baltimore's scheme under Don Martindale was not sack-friendly. The Ravens had trouble generating a lot of pressure, even when just rushing 4 guys. Even when blitzing, it was a struggle for him. But Campbell has been consistent over the course of his career, hasn't really missed a ton of games. I mean, the most games or the least amount of games that he's played in over the course of his career is 12, and that came back in 2020. He has a bunch of 16s up there. He hasn't played a full 17 gamer yet, and honestly, if this is his last year, he won't because, 17 games came in just a couple of years ago. But I'd give a nod to Calais Campbell just based off of what he's been able to do. Walter Payton Man of the Year, Pro Bowler guy. He has all the accolades. I think, his goal, though, obviously Hall of Fame is one of them, I'm sure, but he wants to win. He wants to win so badly. He deserves it. Like, if there's a guy that deserves a ring, I know there are a lot of them across the league. I think Calais Campbell deserves a ring. But I think when we're talking, 5, I don't know how many years it will be down the line. I think Calais Campbell will make his way in there. And Justin Tucker, yeah, that's 100% first ballot for me.
Right. And plus, all right, you talk about the defensive coordinator, Martindale. What's the difference between what Mike McDonald has been doing and what Martindale did last year?
Yeah, I think
between the scheme, because it seemed like they've gotten better. And plus, I think that Baltimore fell apart last year. and he fell on the sword for it.
Right. I was actually a little surprised that the Ravens did what they did in terms of parting ways with him. I thought that 2021 was just such a wash for them injury-wise, where it was like everybody was out, everybody was injured. So I thought that this year they'd be like, all right, let's see what they can do with a fully healthy roster, and then we can make a decision. So they did that with Greg Roman, but it just felt like there was a difference in philosophy, I guess. Maybe John Harbaugh didn't really want to do the blitzing thing as much, and Don Martindale said, well, that's my identity. I don't know what went into it, but Martindale's having success in New York this year. But I think that the main difference is Mike Macdonald is much more, I'd say, strategic in when he blitzes, whereas Don Martindale is very live by the blitz, die by the blitz. If it's working, awesome. If it's not, he's going to do it anyway. And we saw that multiple times last year, the Las Vegas game in week 1, where in overtime, the Raiders were gashing Baltimore. It did not matter. He was continuing to blitz. And on that last play, he sends cover 0. Zay Jones is wide open for the game-winning touchdown. It's things like that where I think there was a little frustration. And I'm not saying Martindale's a bad defensive coordinator. I think he is a very good one. But I just think with Mike Macdonald, he has the pulse of his players. And it took a couple weeks for him to, I think, truly get into the NFL defensive coordinator mindset, where he went over to Michigan and did his thing last year with that program, got him into the playoffs and everything. He comes back to Baltimore, and he's able to work guys into positions where they're successful. He brings guys up at the line, but he's not necessarily sending everybody at once. He's able to, I think, dictate a full 60 minutes of continuous success, not because you're blitzing every single play, but because you understand when to drop guys back into the deep half of the field, when to send help over here. I think the adjustment factor for him, he's able to adjust mid-game. It is not perfect. I mean, there are still instances where you're thinking our end of half defense, end of game defense can be a little better. But I think for Macdonald, there's a very clear philosophy shift from the Don Martindales, we're going to blitz all the time. So I think the Mike Macdonald's more consistent. I'm not going to say it's a safe approach because he is still an aggressive coordinator, but I think that it's just a better situational defense this year.
All right, so now, of course, with this big game, what are you looking for out of the Ravens? Like, what do they need to do that's the big thing in your head that they have to do to win this game against the Steelers?
Yeah, I think one of them I talked about it was the red zone. The red zone's just been so bad for them this year, where they're leaving points on the board, and I'd say they got pretty lucky in that Pittsburgh game, because the way that the Steelers offense, a stat that shocked some people from that game is that Pittsburgh outgained Baltimore by 20 yards. They were moving the ball up and down the field a little bit, but it was the turnovers by Mitch Trubisky in plus territory that did them in. So in a 2-point loss, the Steelers were leaving points on the board. Seemed like a lot of those possessions where you have the Patrick Queen interception, Roquan Smith interception, Marcus Williams. So for Baltimore to combat that, to give yourself a little cushion, converting in the red zone is going to be big. So not trading touchdowns for field goals, not turning the ball over down there. That's going to be big for them. Also, I think the turnover factor in itself is, I think, the main reason, or at least one of them, I think run game and turnovers was why Baltimore won that week 14 matchup. So if you can get Kenny Pickett into some trouble, make him second guess himself on a couple of these plays, it's almost like round 2, but it's technically round 1 because the Ravens and Kenny Pickett didn't really see a lot of each other because he went out with a concussion. So it'll be interesting to see how both match up against each other without film on each other, playing against each other. But I still think that for the Ravens, if you can convert in the red zone and force the Steelers into a couple of mistakes as well as run the football effectively, I think that's where they'll win.
And Kevin, the Ravens, they could potentially have an opportunity to eliminate the Steelers. The Steelers also could be eliminated before even the game starts if the Dolphins win. The Ravens, they would love nothing. Then if it's the case where the Steelers are still, not eliminated, Baltimore would love nothing more than to eliminate them. And they're wearing their all-black uniforms. Baltimore, I think I saw they're 18-5 when they wear the all-black uniforms. So what's your prediction for the game?
I think it's going to be down to the wire. I mean, these games always seem to be hard fought, physical, coming down. I'm going to say it's 23-21 Ravens in a game that's won on a Justin Tucker field goal. I mean, I'm taking Justin Tucker 10 times out of 10. And I think for a lot of these players, I mean, it had been a while since the Ravens beat the Steelers before that week 14 game. I think it was 4 straight wins for Pittsburgh before that. So a lot of the players and everybody in that organization says that you are not a Raven until you beat the Steelers. And so a lot of the players got that first win. I mean, Calais Campbell, that was his first win, even though he's been in Baltimore. This is his third year with the Ravens. So I think they want to build off of that win, but also they understand the importance of it. I still think it's not going to be a super high scoring game because of the Ravens quarterback situation, because both defenses, I think, are going to come to play. I think it's going to be a defensive slugfest, but I'll give it 23-21 Ravens in that close, hard-fought finish.
Yeah, and, I love watching Lamar Jackson play too. Even, I would like to see him against the Steelers. This is his 5th time where he's going to miss a game against the Steelers, which is pretty crazy. He's only played against Pittsburgh 3 times, and it just seems like bad luck every time they play the Steelers. Lamar's injured or something happened.
Yeah, it's crazy because if you had to ask me a question of which opponent has Lamar Jackson struggled the most against in his career, I think it's Pittsburgh by a pretty wide margin. I mean, that defense has given him issues over the course of his career. He's had some moments, absolutely, but I think usually with him, there is always some aspect of whenever he plays Pittsburgh, that defense comes to play. I mean, then they come to play most weeks, don't get me wrong, but I think for Lamar, I would love to see him against this defense again, because, again, it has been a while since we've seen that. It's going to be Tyler Huntley twice this year, but Lamar just gives them so much, and so he's going to be missed in this game, especially against a defense where, look, if Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt are able to get to you, you have to have that escapability. I think Tyler Huntley has it, but he doesn't have Lamar Jackson escapability. And I know the experience Lamar Jackson has helps him out a lot. Huntley, he has plenty of starting experience now because of the injuries that Jackson has had over the course of the last 2 seasons. But I wish that we were able to get a Lamar Jackson versus Steelers game, because I think so many people want it, and I'm one of those people.
Well, when I look at it like this, it's obviously going to be close. I'm going to say that it's 20-17 Steelers, and I think Kenny Pickett comes up big in the final drive again. Once again, I think he kind of puts there's some inklings with people close to the Steelers media and around the league that still don't believe in him. I think that a win on a big rivalry game like this, once again, in a primetime spot, I think that silence it once again.
All right. Usually, because Kevin, I always talk about when in this rivalry, the law of averages. I thought, all right, the Steelers swept last year. They swept the year before. I think I got to go with Baltimore with a sweep this year. It's just it's just how this happens. And I think Baltimore's a little bit better off with Tyler Huntley in this matchup, better than Lamar Jackson.
I think Huntley provides a little bit more in terms of, I guess, for lack of a better word, shape-shifting against the Steelers defense. I think he provides a little bit of what is he going to do in this situation that kind of keeps the team off balance, a la the last game, in which he played the majority of that, and then Anthony Brown came in towards the end. Right. But I view it as always something's weird with this team, in which I say that you can surprise them once with a player, but even though it is on the road, again, it's hard to surprise them twice, especially with so much for a thing that we've buried here in the lead, that if a loss here, that's Tomlin's first losing season.
Right. And then that too. Whew. It's going to be a tough one. Due to that, I'm going to go with the Steelers. I don't know. I know I'm going against the law of averages, but something like there's like usually one pick per year that I usually go with the Steelers, and I regret going with the Steelers. This may be it. Boswell, even though he missed a couple last week, I'll chalk it up to the cold, because like you kick it in 8-degree weather, kicking the ball is like kicking a center block.
Pretty much, yeah.
But
have you ever tried to kick a field goal in Acrisure Stadium?
Acrisure Stadium, but it's like 8-degree weather on top of that. It's like kicking a cinder block. But I'm gonna go with I'm gonna say it's gonna be 21. Because this is the Steelers and Ravens. The Steelers can't score. 21-17, Pittsburgh.
Okay. Yeah, I like I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, too. I think last time I checked, the Ravens were 2.5-point favorites, and the over-under was 35 points. So I want to kind of go with Kevin there. I want to say a Justin Tucker field goal wins the game for the Baltimore. I'll say 17-16. So what was that, 33 points? So I'll go the under of the 35. I don't think the Steelers' offense is that good, obviously. Like Matt Canada, I think they need to change offense coordinators after this year. And, the team that turns the ball over more, simple kind of analysis. But I think whoever turns it over more is going to lose this game. And I think Pickett might have a bad interception or something, which will turn the tide of the game.
Kevin, I want to ask you this because, of course, there is a civil war going on in the Steelers fan base, which is obviously more centered around the coach, but also the quarterback. And you mentioned it with Harbaugh and Jackson. Harbaugh basically having his tenure with the Ravens saved because of Lamar Jackson. Now there's a lot of Steelers fans out here. I can't stand them. You can see it on our Twitter page, in which I had to fight off a blasphemous one. Just talk about that entire saga with it, and so that maybe Steelers fans can realize that, look, even with any quarterback, especially with Tomlin, yes, he was gifted Ben Roethlisberger as a franchise quarterback, and Harbaugh had to build Joe Flacco up from the dirt. But if there's one thing that Harbaugh got, is he got that second chance. And you can also argue with Roethlisberger, maybe he had an evolution in his play under Tomlin. Just talk about giving that quarterback or that coach a second chance to find that next franchise quarterback, because that was the difference in the Ravens between the off years of Flacco and to now Lamar Jackson.
Right, and I think there's a contingent of Ravens fans also who are pretty ready for the next coach, for John Harbaugh to have his tenure end. I think when you're talking about coaches, though, who have had so much consistent success, like a John Harbaugh or a Mike Tomlin, those guys are pretty hard to find in the part where I think if either of those guys were to get let go, so if Tomlin was fired by the Steelers or if Harbaugh was fired by the Ravens, you'd have 10-plus teams lining up out the door to try to get that guy as their next head coach. And some things just go stale. Like, I get that sometimes a coach has just overstayed his welcome. But for the Ravens in 2018, they struggled for a lot of that year before Lamar Jackson came in. They were 4-5 entering their bye week. Joe Flacco got injured in the game leading up to, I think it was the Steelers game where Flacco got injured that year. And then after the bye week, they made the change because Flacco wasn't ready to go. So they had to have Lamar Jackson come in and play. And Harbaugh and Jackson just hit it off immediately. There was a connection between the two, and teams just were not ready. There was no film on Jackson at the NFL level. And the offense then was so vastly – that was still under Marty Mornhinweg. So the offense was built for Joe Flacco, and then you put it in Lamar Jackson's hands. If you had to pick like two different quarterbacks, like on opposite ends of the spectrum, Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco are very different players, in terms of Joe Flacco is not shifty like Lamar Jackson is. Like, he's not juking anybody out when he's running. So I think that for what Baltimore has now, the connection that those two guys have built, I think the end of Flacco's tenure, and even, people argue, the big question here is Joe Flacco elite, or was Joe Flacco elite? I always say he was, and obviously I know that's kind of just like a joke for many, but I still think that what he had, Harbaugh's a player's coach. He has these players, the pulse of the team. It's hard to find coaches like that. So I understand, look, is Harbaugh clear of all criticism? No, there are plenty of decisions that he's made over the course of his tenure that have not been great ones. In-game management, especially this year, there have been a couple that have been kind of questioned, and I've questioned those too. But it's hard to find a consistent coach like that. But you always have to look and ask yourself, is this coach the best option for your players? I think that, you guys were talking about Matt Canada maybe being the guy that is on the way out potentially. I don't know. I know for Ravens fans, it's Greg Roman, their offensive coordinator, who has been getting a lot of flack this year. So I think in Baltimore's perspective, before John Harbaugh would get fired, I'd think Greg Roman would be the first to go. You can see what Lamar does in a new offense if Lamar's the guy for you, which, again, I think he should be for the Ravens. But there's always something about a coach and a quarterback and a team. We can look at what happened in Denver this year. That was a dumpster fire. It was a disaster for them. Sometimes that can happen where you think you're hiring the right guy and all of a sudden it just doesn't work out for you. So, look, I'm completely on the train of if it's not working for you and if it's been consistently not working for you, that it's time to move on and find somebody. Because complacency for me, you don't want to be complacent. You can't just say, oh, well, we made the wild card round every year and then we got eliminated. You want to achieve higher goals than that. So for me, that's my big thing. But I think for these teams that have these consistent coaches, such as the Ravens and the Steelers, you really have to be sure that you can find something either as good or honestly better than what you have, or else you're setting your franchise back who knows how many years.
All right. Say that they want to move on from not Harbaugh, but from Greg Roman. What type of offense do you think you would need to maximize Lamar Jackson's full potential, say, if he comes back, if and when he comes back? What type of offense you need for him to take the next level? Because it seems like under that offense, he has plateaued.
Yeah, it seems like, well, my stance on Greg Roman has been, I think he's a fine offensive coordinator, but I think the relationship between the Ravens and Greg Roman probably is too stale at this point. I think they probably should move on the offseason unless like they win the Super Bowl or get to the Super Bowl or something like that. I think for Lamar, we've seen him in an offense. We've seen him in an offense that maximizes the run game, and it's been a great rushing offense, right? But I think he deserves to have some weapons, some star weapons on the outside, where Mark Andrews, elite tight end, one of the best in the league, but the receivers this year, I mean, we talked about it earlier where, people from the outside are like, who even is Baltimore's number one wide receiver right now? It's DeMarcus Robinson, who was cut by the Raiders in the offseason, had some moments with Kansas City, but the receiving core right now is DeMarcus Robinson, Sammy Watkins, Deshaun Jackson, Tylan Wallace was designated to return from injured reserve. Rashad Bateman's injured. I think he still has the potential to be a great player, but for me, we've seen the Cardinals go out there and get DeAndre Hopkins from Kyler Murray, and they got Marquise Brown from Baltimore for Kyler Murray. The Bills got Stephon Diggs for Josh Allen. The Eagles got A.J. Brown for Jalen Hurts. I think for any quarterback, you need to have at least one elite threat on the out, like number one guy. And I think what you can do if you're Baltimore is if DeAndre Hopkins gets put back on that trade block, the Ravens had interest in DeAndre Hopkins in that 2020 draft before he got traded to Arizona. I think that's a perfect guy you can go out there and get for Lamar Jackson. You can run spread looks. Instead of running 4 tight end sets, I'd like to see this offense be more spread in terms of being able to get guys in situations to win on the outside, while also you can use Mark Andrews in the slot in that situation and still have an elite run game there, where I think you don't have to go away from your run first identity, but I think more of a balanced look overall that has more success in the passing game. Because I think Lamar Jackson, his ability as a passer, again, as I talked about, still very underrated because we just haven't seen him in an offense that I think completely maximizes that aspect of his game. And while he's so great as a running, it's such a good aspect of his game. I think you want to have the balancing impact of him being able to show off his arm, which is great, as well as him being able to show off his legs. And I think Baltimore has moved to a more balanced offense over the course of his tenure. But I just think getting him that elite threat, putting that elite threat in a position to succeed, where the whole conversation around Baltimore has been, well, why would guys go there? They're only going to get 3 targets a game and it's going to be 2 catches a game and they're not going to be happy there. Why would you invest $60 million in a wide receiver where they're not going to be used? I think in an offense where those guys are used more and you're putting Lamar Jackson in that successful area to use those guys, I think that's an offense I'd like to see him in.
Yeah, and people forget about Greg Roman. He was the offensive coordinator in San Francisco for Colin Kaepernick. So they ran that kind of similar Nevada pistol style run game with the option, which is in hindsight perfect for a spread option team like the Ravens. If I look at it like this, you're talking about a balance and still trying to keep the run game. I think one guy to look at would ironically be, we're talking about DeAndre Hopkins if they were to let go of him, Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, it's a little. I know it's weirdish with the air raid style attack that he's had, but I think if you mix him in there with a good run game coordinator somewhere out there that can help him out with that, I think that there's something that could be done there with him. But that's just me having speculation for Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people have talked about, like, oh, why don't they just demote Greg Roman to run game? And I'm like, Greg Roman's not accepting an emotion. It's either you're all in or you're all out, and you have to move in a new direction, or you got to continue on the same path. I just think it's gotten too stale for the Ravens. And it's multiple different aspects where it's play calling, it's play clock stuff. There's a tweet from Bomani Jones, I think it was 8 years ago, and he said, whoever hires Greg Roman, be prepared to waste those timeouts and have that play clock go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we've seen that issue. It hasn't been just a month or two. It's been years. There have been years of play clock issues for the Ravens, situational play calling. Again, I think Roman's a fine offensive coordinator. I just think the tenure in Baltimore has grown a bit too stale. And I think that in the offseason, if something crazy doesn't happen, I think they should probably look at it in a new direction there.
Kevin, how many blown leads have resulted in losses this year for the Ravens? I remember that Jacksonville one. I was watching that one, but I think I don't know how many. There was more, like 4 or something like that. How many?
Miami was one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Buffalo was another. Yeah, they've had a couple of them, and it was a huge issue early in the year because the Miami game is the one that's just the glaring one. They were up by so many points in that fourth quarter, and Tua just threw all over them. And I know because I was playing them in fantasy that week, so it was double trouble for me. But I think for what you have now, the defense is definitely they've been able to secure, and I think steadily over the season improve. Where I wouldn't even put the Giants' loss also was a blown lead, but that was more on the offense because they turned the ball over to the Giants deep into their own territory. So the defense was working with like a 20-yard field on like 2 or 3 straight possessions, and there's not a ton you can do with that if you're a defense, regardless of how good you are. So the blown leads have been less of a factor. The Jacksonville game was another one where you can pin that on the defense because Baltimore's offense, for as much as they struggled since the bye week, that was like the one quarter where they were just putting up points and points and points, but Jacksonville mashed them and beat them in that game. So I'd be shocked if a blown lead happened. I mean, look, anything can happen. I'd be shocked if the Ravens defense blew a lead, but there have been issues with them not playing a full 60 minutes on defense where they'll play a great 45 or they'll play a great 55, and then they just let up. They let their foot up off the gas, and it either gets a lot closer than it needs to be or they lose the game. So that's an area where I could see it happen because I've seen it happen before, and I'm not necessarily shocked by anything anymore. It happens both good or bad for the Ravens. But at the same time, the blown leads are definitely, I think, why Baltimore's in this situation now where if they beat Miami, if they beat Buffalo, Jacksonville, they're probably in the driver's seat for the AFC North instead of one game behind Cincinnati like they are now.
Even home field. But now, honest assessment, since they already clinched their playoff spot, what do you think is their best matchup in the first round of the playoffs, say if they don't win the division? Because you got all these teams going, even the Steelers are going up and down and round, and AFC East, Steelers, you got the Titans. What team would you want to face in the first round, your most comfortable face in the first round, and what team would you fear?
Yeah, I think in terms of facing, I think if Tennessee somehow found their way, I know it's very unlikely now at this point, but if Tennessee found their way in there, I think I would take the AFC South winner, regardless of if it's Tennessee or Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville can make some noise this year, 100%. But if Baltimore doesn't win the division, your options are either Buffalo, Kansas City, Cincinnati, or whatever team wins the AFC South. I don't want to play Kansas City in the first round up in Baltimore. Cincinnati, you'd go back-to-back weeks, actually, in Cincinnati if that were to happen, if Baltimore were to lose the division, if it was like the 3-6 matchup, because Cincinnati would maybe be the 3 and then Baltimore would be the 6. So I think out of all those teams, it'd have to be Tennessee or Jacksonville to be. The team that I fear the most, I still think this is Kansas City's AFC. I mean, they've hit their stride, and, for Patrick Mahomes, he's just otherworldly. That I think with some of the pieces they have on that defense, even though it's not the best defense in the world, don't get me wrong, but Chris Jones is somebody you got to look out for. Even without Tyreek Hill, they're hitting on all cylinders right now. So I still think for me, Kansas City would be the one that I wouldn't want to see.
It's fair to say, guys. So that'll do it for us. That's Kevin Oestricher from Locked On Ravens. Kevin, thank you so much for another great podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. It's always fun hopping on, and I hope we'll be able to talk again soon.
Thanks,
Kevin. In the playoffs.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Hopefully. AFC Championship game. Let's do it. Nope, but that ain't going to happen.
Let's not put the cart before the horse, Brandon, but you never know. Anyway, that's all for us. Thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz.
Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, at @RBlitzPod, and at Blitz Videos. And subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. The Renegade Blitz podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and wherever else you can listen to podcasts.